Imagine you are a Roman soldier. You have marched 1,500 miles from Rome. You are standing on the coast of Gaul, looking out at the English Channel. Behind you are 250,000 men, the largest military force Rome has assembled in a generation. The war machines are ready. The fleet is waiting. And then your emperor points at the water and says, "Attack it." You raise your spear. The man next to you raises his spear. 250,000 Roman soldiers, the most disciplined military force in the ancient world, begin stabbing the ocean. Afterward, your emperor orders you to collect seashells. He calls them the spoils of war. He calls them trophies of victory over Neptune, god of the sea, and Rome. Legally, ceremonially, officially, declares it a victory. This happened in 40 AD. And the man who ordered it was the third emperor of Rome, a man history has called the embodiment of insane tyranny, a monster, a madman. His name was Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. You know him as Caligula. But here is what the story of the war on the sea actually reveals. When you look at it carefully, when you understand the world it happened in, Caligula may not have been simply insane. He may have been doing something more calculated, more Roman, and more disturbing than madness. To understand what happened on that beach, you first need to understand who Caligula was before he became Caligula. His father was Germanicus, arguably the most beloved Roman general of his generation. The people adored Germanicus the way they had adored Julius Caesar. When Germanicus died in 19 AD, possibly poisoned by agents of Emperor Tiberius, Rome went into genuine public mourning, and his young son, the boy who had grown up in military camps, who wore tiny soldier boots that the legionnaires thought were adorable, who they nicknamed Caligula, meaning little boots, inherited all of that love. When Caligula became emperor in 37 AD at the age of 24, Rome erupted in celebration. He freed political prisoners. He abolished the hated treason trials. He burned the secret files that Tiberius had used to condemn senators. He was generous, personable, apparently reasonable. In his first 7 months, the Senate passed every measure he proposed. The people called him the son they had always wanted. And then, in the autumn of 37 AD, Caligula became seriously ill. What the illness was, no one can say with certainty. He nearly died. He was bedridden for weeks. When he recovered, he was different. The cruelties began. The executions became arbitrary. He humiliated senators publicly, forcing them to run beside his chariot. He claimed divine status, not after death, as Roman emperors typically did, but while alive, while sitting on the throne, demanding to be addressed as a god. He had a temple built to himself on the Capitoline Hill. He reportedly had conversations with the statue of Jupiter, demanding to be treated as an equal. The horse. The story everyone knows. Caligula supposedly made his horse incitatus, a senator, or a consul, or a priest. The exact claim varies depending on which ancient source you believe. The truth is murkier. He certainly lavished the horse with absurd luxuries. Whether it was ever formally given political office, or whether this was a later exaggeration by his enemies, who were many and who wrote most of what we know about him, is debated. What is not debated is that by 40 AD, after 3 years on the throne, Caligula had exhausted the treasury his predecessor had carefully accumulated, had executed several members of his own family, and had developed a relationship with the Roman Senate that could only be described as mutual terror. And then he announced a military campaign. He was going to conquer Britain. No Roman emperor had attempted this since Julius Caesar, nearly a century earlier. And Caesar had turned back. Caligula assembled an enormous army on the Rhine frontier. The logistics alone were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, siege equipment, a fleet of ships. The operation moved toward the coast of Gaul with the full weight of Roman military infrastructure behind it. When they reached Gesoriacum, the Roman port on the English Channel, where modern Boulogne now stands, something happened. The ancient sources disagree on exactly what, but the broad outline is consistent. The army arrived at the shore, and instead of crossing, Caligula ordered the attack on the sea. Soldiers stabbed the waves. They were then ordered to collect seashells. The shells were loaded into crates and transported back to Rome as official war trophies. Caligula demanded a triumph. Rome's highest military honor, a grand ceremonial procession through the city, for his victory over the ocean. The Senate, cautiously, declined to grant the full triumph. Caligula returned to Rome anyway, furious, threatening to have the Senate executed. And then, on January 24th, 41 AD, members of his own Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers who served as imperial bodyguards, stabbed him to death in a corridor beneath the palace. He was 28 years old. He had been emperor for 3 years, 10 months, and 8 days. And for 2,000 years, the story of the War on the Sea has been treated as the defining proof of his madness. Look, historians have said, a man so detached from reality that he sent armies to fight the ocean. A man so broken that he collected seashells and called them victory trophies. But there is another explanation. Several of them, in fact. The first, his soldiers mutinied. When the army arrived at the English Channel, the legions refused to crossing the ocean. The great Oceanus that Romans believed encircled the entire known world was a terrifying proposition, both militarily and cosmologically. The sea was Neptune's domain. To cross it uninvited was to challenge a god. When the soldiers balked, Caligula's order to attack the water may not have been madness. It may have been humiliation. You refuse to cross? Fine. Then fight the water where you stand and collect your trophies. The second, Roman religious theater. The Oceanus. The ocean was not just water to the Romans. It was a deity. The boundary between the known world and everything beyond. For a Roman emperor who claimed to be a god himself, defeating the ocean, making it submit, was a symbolic act of cosmic power. He was not fighting water. He was performing a ritual conquest of the world's edge. The third, and perhaps the most uncomfortable explanation, the whole seashell story may be exaggeration or fabrication spread by his enemies after his death. The sources for Caligula's reign were written decades later, mostly by men who had every reason to paint him as monstrous. Suetonius wrote his account 80 years after the events. Cassius Dio wrote his account nearly 200 years later. Ancient historians were not journalists. They were storytellers with audiences and agendas. None of this means Caligula was sane or good or anything other than what the evidence clearly shows. A man who killed people for entertainment, who humiliated the institutions of Roman governance, who spent a treasury built over decades in months, who ended his reign in blood. But the War on the Sea tells us something more interesting than mere madness. It tells us what absolute power does when it has no limit. When there is no institution strong enough to say no, when the mechanisms that exist to check the behavior of powerful people, the Senate, the laws, the traditions of Roman governance, have been made irrelevant by fear or by force. When a single human being has the authority to point at an ocean and command an army to attack it, 250,000 soldiers, the most powerful military machine in the ancient world, standing on a beach, stabbing at waves, because the man who owned them told them to. Caligula did not conquer Britain. He did not defeat the sea. He collected seashells and called them trophies, and the soldiers who collected them received their pay and their rations and their official commendations for valor in the field. Rome called it a victory, because when the most powerful man in the world says it is a victory, there is no one left to disagree. Remember that. The next time someone in power tells you something impossible was achieved, ask what the seashells were.